Well, welcome back to another episode and testimony. Today we have someone that most of our church are pretty familiar with. They see him most Sundays up on stage. So we have Steve Martin here, a preacher for 25 years at Union Hill. And just, Steve, appreciate you coming by and being able to share a little bit about your story. I know we hear a lot of stories in your sermons as you have shared a lot about yourself growing up, but I think it would be nice to hear just kind of a more concise version instead of kind of bits and pieces. So why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about what was it like for you growing up, where you grew up at, and what it looked like.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. We're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now that you've gone through all the important people. I do appreciate what you're doing, and I've heard a number of people talk about how they're listening and find all that very interesting. So I appreciate this ministry. Most everybody knows I grew up in a little town in Oklahoma. I often make reference to Shady Point, but sometimes they're surprised when they ask where I was born, and I say just outside Los Angeles, California, because I was born in Downey, which is near L.A., and that's part of the shaping of my story because my father's father, my grandfather, Arlen Martin, was a coal miner for much of his life early on. But when the mines would go dry there in eastern Oklahoma, he'd go with a lot of Okies to California and work factory work to make a living and bring his 8 kids with him. And occasionally some of them kind of stayed out there and worked for a while. And my father, the youngest of those, was working when he met my mom there. And so I was born there, but only we remained about 9 months before my dad, who wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, took my mom from the L.A. area to Shady Point, Oklahoma, which was a significant cultural shift for her, you can imagine. And that's where I grew up there at Shady Point, a little house, a town of about 150 people. We had 1st through 8th grade at the school, and grades were combined in a classroom. So 1st and 2nd would be in the same room together, 3rd and 4th in a room together. Of that, probably 9 kids I graduated with. If you went to high school, you had 2 choices. There was Poteau, which is a little bigger town where, kids that might entertain the idea of going to college might go. And then, but Martin's went to Panama. So that's where I went. And kind of conglomeration school, a number of little communities sent their kids there for high school. So that's where I attended there. And we attended the little Church of Christ there in Panama for a while. Most of my family's Pentecostal, but my mom's dad, he had kind of converted to Church of Christ when he was out in California. And then that was important for my mom. And so my dad would go along with her there and ended up the preacher there. I remember when he baptized my dad. But that little church had some major problems, and I'm sure it depends on who you talk to. But they fired that preacher. And so we didn't go anywhere for a little while. That was very hurtful to my dad. But later we ended up going to Poteau, a Church of Christ there. And that's where I would pretty well consider my home congregation. It was a very conservative group. So, but my dad, especially with his and most of my dad's family all lived around there, were also Assembly of God. And so I kind of grew up with these 2 sides. One, this pretty conservative side that you might expect from traditional churches of Christ, very loving community, but very conservative. But on the other hand, a strong influence of the Pentecostal side, that God was always active and engaged in our life. And if you're just attentive, you'll see him present in your life. So I had both of those sides that shaped me.
How did you find that balance between kind of 2 sometimes dramatically different church backgrounds? And so that shaping of you growing up, having both of those sides, where did you find that balance in your own life?
Yes, I don't know. It was just almost, there was definitely conflict between these 2 sides where, I'd come home, my dad would share that he was just out eating lunch and doing a little fishing while he was at at a lunch break, and a horn honked, and he realized he was in the middle of nowhere. He didn't know why it was somebody behind his vehicle, or there's a horn honk again, and gets up and walks over, and there's no vehicles around, and lightning strikes where he was just sitting, and he said that was my own horn that God was honking to get him away from that. So I grew up with that, and then I'd kind of go to the Church of Christ where teaching was pretty well that doesn't happen kind of teaching. And so I think that I think I learned to see benefit in both approaches. Understand that on one side, Scripture presents a God who is active and engaged in our world. But yet also I could see from some family members where everything was a sign. So the washing machine breaks, so maybe that's a sign I need to move. Or so I could see dangers and opportunity in all of that. But early on, I realized that just because somebody says something's true doesn't necessarily mean there's two sides to different things, and multiple sides of God who can't be perhaps pigeonholed too much into one particular denominational category, perhaps.
Yes, I think we, even here at Union Hill, we have a multi kind of cultural to the fact that we have a lot of backgrounds come to our church, and that brings in a lot of those aspects. But there is a God that is still living and working in the world today. But you can go, as you said, so far to the effect of like, well, everything's a sign that something needs to happen or something needs to change, and that just brings about a lot of questions and sometimes anxiety to the extreme of it. So then, well, that's not the God. Like, God is one of stability and not chaos, where if everything's a sign, then okay, then nothing's a sign almost at that point.
And there's tension in Scripture when these images of God, and that I think that we need to hold to. When we try to narrow God to one particular metaphor, then that's when we get in trouble. We want to see him only with one perspective, but he is lion and he's lamb.
Yeah.
He is the almighty consuming fire and he's friend. There's so much about God in his plethora of dimensions that when we narrow that, we lose, and the image of God becomes distorted.
Yeah. And so with that kind of multifaceted layered effect and that background that you had, what was kind of the point that you would say, this is where I really decided to follow Jesus? Was there a one moment that you remember, or was it kind of just the lifelong of having Christians in your life and God in your life? What was just that point that you decided to make it your full life?
So, yeah, I think that for me, unlike many people with a dramatic conversion experience, God was always present and a part of my life. So different points along the way, I think that there were kind of death, burial, and resurrection occurred. Certainly a significant time was at church camp, as a teen, and I was baptized there in Lake Tenkiller in Oklahoma at Burnt Cabin Youth Camp. That was a significant moment. And then just different phases throughout my life have these awakenings, I think. That still, happened in varying degrees.
So not necessarily just a one single moment, but that continuation of, camp was an experience that was really important for me as a teenager. So that decision to give your life to Christ there, but then, as you said, multiple awakening points that happened along the way.
Yes, yeah, I think that's been true for me because God was always very present in my family, and I'm so very thankful that my mom and my dad, who extremely different people, very different personalities, not just because they grew up in very different worlds, but see things differently and approach things differently, but yet God is central to both of them. And so because of that, then, he just always has been present in my life. It's just I've not always been as attuned to him and his presence.
Yeah. And so then I guess leading into more modern day, gave your life to Christ as a teenager, graduated from high school, and you've said multiple times that you went to school for broadcast and were weatherman, correct? So how did you go from that kind of career choice then to being the preacher here at Union Hill since the plant for 25 years now?
Yeah, so I went to Harding. I think some in my family were concerned about me going there, and especially on the Pentecostal side, groups concerned that I would be just because some people they had seen that were kind of just hostile toward anything that was different or didn't fit a very clear-cut mold of how God works and when He can work and how He can work. But I had a preacher there in church in Podo who had sons that had gone to Harding, and it took me up there. And the plan was to go play football there, and so that ended up not working out. But I already had everything set up to be there. So I went there in the summer right out of high school, and instead of going in football training, I just had a job set up, went to work, and then majoring there. I was a computer science major because there was no one in my family had ever gone to college before that I could reference or talk to about it. So I had no concept of that, or even jobs. There weren't really jobs around where I grew up that had people with any type of collegiate degree. So my grandfather said, electrical engineering and computer science, that's going to be the way to the future. So, okay. So I went in that degree, and that's where I started off. And kind of the job I took at the school was working with backing up the computer systems. And then, when I would come out from after doing that, which was usually in the evening, I came out right next to where the communications department was and where their little television station was. So I started having dialogue with people in that, and I ended up trying out for a broadcasting position and got it as a freshman, which I guess was kind of unusual. So that got me very interested in that world, and ended up then switching to mass communications and graduating with that degree. And then from there, ended up going to Wichita Falls, Texas, that market, and working, and ended up doing weather there. And while I was there, that's when the transition happened to ministry.
Okay. So what led you, because you did youth ministry for a while, correct, down in Texas.
Yeah.
And so what was it about, whether it was the job that you were in or the appeal of getting into ministry? What kind of led to that choice of a career change?
Yeah. Well, okay, so now you're going to hear a little Pentecostal side of my experience speaking to you for a moment. So I had kind of a plan, in broadcasting, what size market I was going to be and where I was going to go from here, and working my way up the ladder. And I ran into a friend that I knew at Harding, and I asked them, I said, I think it was at the Tulsa workshop, in fact. And I said, so what's your 5-year plan? And I really honestly didn't care what their 5-year plan was. I wanted them to ask me what my 5-year, 10-year plan was, because I had it all mapped out. And they answered saying, I don't know, but I know I'll be serving the Lord. And my first thought was, well, you don't really have a plan, do you? That's what people say who don't have a plan. But that gnawed at me. When I left the workshop, I came with a book by Frank Peretti called The Prophet. And I just don't read nonfiction. I just kind of more a history kind of guy. But, fictitious fiction type work. So, I ended up reading this book, and it's about a guy who worked for Channel 6 News. I worked for Channel 6 News, and who realized that he was a prophet, not the kind that could foretell the future kind of a thing. That's, but more the New Testament understanding of prophet, which is a person that God speaks through. And so I thought, well, that is very interesting. I go back to my home congregation, and my hometown, one of the main elders there just walks up to me and says, Steve, it's about time you started preaching. That's all he said to me, and walked away. I come back to Texas. And this is all within like a week or two. And one of the church leaders said, we'd like to take you out to lunch. And so I went with them. They said, our youth and family minister is leaving. And there's 3 criteria that we had established for who we would hire to replace him: a Bible degree, married, and experience in church work. You don't have any of those, and yet we feel you must be the guy that we need to ask. I fought it still for a while, but it was obvious that God was working in that situation. And I kind of submitted to that and made that transition.
Yeah. So just kind of 3 separate experiences to happen really close by to be like, oh, well, there's this comparison of this book that I'm reading, then to have a elder kind of speak to you in that sense of like, hey, you should be doing this. And then the kind of final straw of, hey, you don't fit any of the criteria we said that we were wanting, but we all feel like you are the one to be, to come into this role.
Yeah, there have been very few times that, I mean, it's not like this happens all the time, very few times in my life, but they have come at decisive moments in my life that I felt God had helped to direct me somewhere. And that was a major one for sure.
And I think that goes back to like how we see God working in the world today is not necessarily, we struggle. I know when we talk to people, like especially the youth, of like we see the Old Testament God doing really big, powerful things and showing really big signs. But then for our modern world, it's like we don't have God like speaking through all these things, but God still has his spirit and messages that are interacting. If we believe in a living God, then we have to believe he's still living in this world and using people to have his will come. So being able to get that book and have those people speak into it, to then have the, okay, God, maybe you are guiding and directing this direction. I need to submit to where you're wanting me to go. Yeah.
I mean, the next major moment like that came when I was sitting in my office and I get a phone call. So now I made the transition to ministry. I get a phone call from a guy. He says, hello, my name is John Sheffield, and I'm a preacher at the Ames Church of Christ. I've heard about you, and he mentioned a mutual friend that we had, and I'd like to tell you about a young woman. I said, okay. So he says, he starts telling me all the things about her, and then in the end he says, and this is my daughter, and I'm going to give you her phone number, and you can do with it as you choose. Okay, well, that was interesting. I had 3 people to call that day, scheduling stuff. So one of them was a youth minister in Oklahoma that I talked with them because I was scheduling a hike. After talking with him, I said, hey, David, do you know this Amy Sheffield? And he said, oh yeah, she's incredible. He said, she was a summer singer, wonderful. He said, you ought to talk to about this. You ought to ask Big Don Williams. Now, I had never met Big Don Williams, had never called Big Don Williams, but guess who was the second person on my list to call that day to set up a singles event that he was supposed to speak at. So I called Big Don Williams at the end of that conversation. I said, hey, would you tell me, did you know this Amy Sheffield? Oh, yes. And basically what I remember him saying is, I don't really know you, Steve, but you don't have a chance. So that was kind of it. So anyway, other things happen. I call her, I go down to meet, and 4 months after that first date, we were married.
Wow. Some people might say very quick succession, but when you feel like the Lord's moving in that direction and all the signs point in that way.
I think it's just because I'm remarkably dense that God has to say, okay, I really have to get this guy's attention here.
I'm going to give you signs
I'm going to make it so blatant that you cannot ignore it.
Oh, man.
And then another major was, Sunset Leaders were on a construction campaign in Mexico we're helping to build a church building. And some of those leaders, like Joe Bright and Robert Curley, were talking with Rick Owens, who's this kind of, just a rough character who does church construction buildings down there for churches. And they say, we have this idea about planning a church, and we're going to try to find somebody to help plant that. And Rick said, well, I know your guy. And so I had worked with Rick on construction campaigns before, and Rick told them they needed to reach out to me. And then Rick called me and said, Steve, he said, there's this church interested in planning a congregation. They're going to be reaching out to you. He said that's in the Springfield area of Missouri. Rick said, now Joplin's an armpit, so you don't want to go there. Sorry to everybody from Joplin. That's Rick. You take it up with Rick. But he said, no, Springfield, that's a nice area, but they want to plant somewhere around there. So I did hear from Sunset, and then things began moving there as well.
Wow. So the big decisions in your life to change career paths, and then person you marry, and then to kind of transition up to Union Hill, all had pretty, maybe not obvious signs, since you said there had to be multiple of them to get your attention, but feeling like God has definitely impacted and guided you to a place that you needed to be, and that he, or more importantly, he needed you to be, to work. And I know kind of the same experience of how I found Union Hill was kind of similar, of just out of the blue, started looking for jobs, and Lisa's aunt had texted us because we had just graduated from OC, and she didn't know I was looking for youth ministry jobs because I was an accountant. And so she texted and said, hey, do you know any youth ministers looking for a job? Our youth minister in Dallas, Texas knows some people in Springfield area, and they're looking. I said, well, I'm actually looking for a job, and was talking to my dad about it. And then Joe Brumfield had just been hired up in Kansas City. And so he was like, hey, do you mind if I ask Joe about the church? So Joe called me. He's like, hey, I know Steve. It's a great church. And talked to Joe for a while. I was like, let me call Steve. And then you called me, and things just kind of rolled pretty quickly. But to like go from never hearing of, I knew of Branson, but that was the only thing, to then have all those connections of God using people to move into something that both Lisa and I would say Union Hill was where we needed to be, and where God needed us to be as well. Is just, I think, a good way to see how God interacts in our world around us still today.
Yeah, I think if we just are more attentive, then we will see where he's at work. And I think, too often here's what I want you to do, God, and we pray God will make that happen, rather than trying to be attentive to what he is doing, and then hear his invitation to join what he is doing. And for me, that has always worked out incredibly well. And on the other hand, I bet every time I was driving something, it usually comes back to bite me. So you'd think I would learn after all these years, but no, I still have to get bitten every once in a while to remember that's not how it works with God.
Yes, of letting God be the driver of where he's wanting places to grow. I think we see that reflected here at church as well, of just areas of growth that have kind of naturally happened over the years. And when it's time for maybe a transition, then it seems to naturally transition out of where it was before. But with that growth, kind of being here you have a unique position of being the only preaching or pulpit minister that Union Hill has had for 25 years, which is kind of unheard of for most ministries in general. So what has that been like, having come here and been the preacher here at Union Hill since its beginning?
Yeah. Well, Caleb, some guys just aren't good enough to go anywhere else, so they're just kind of, everybody's stuck with them because they can't get rid of them.
I know that is not really the case here, but
yeah, it really has been. I mean, when I first started, and I told our elders that my vision was to be preaching here with gray hair. And here I am, I've got quite a few of them going now, but I also understand that I've been incredibly blessed, which also probably speaks to my lack of talent and immaturity, but the fact that God has put so many great people around me says this guy really needs a lot of help. So I've had, unlike a lot of unfortunate stories that have happened with other people and preachers, that has caused a lot of damage to them, their marriage, to their kids. We have been always fortunate, and that really began with I think, shepherds who were very protective of me and my family early on, and a church that just was loving and supportive and didn't have, I think, unrealistic expectations for me. That was very helpful early on too. So, and people that just jumped in and didn't say, Steve, why don't you go do that? If there was a need, they just did it. And so all of that has been an incredible opportunity to be a part of.
Yeah, and especially, as you said, having elders that are protective and wanting the best for not only the church, but just as the preacher, because sometimes it seems to be a contention point for churches. And you speak of the kind of the terrible stories that we unfortunately hear of just mistreatment, or there's some bitter rivalry or whatever it is that happens. But to have a healthy church for these 25 years, and that goes back to, again, the leadership that God has put into place to have the mindset of we're growing together and not the unrealistic expectations of, oh, you do everything by yourself and that's what we hired you for, is to do everything on your own. Having people to jump in there and serve, like every member's a minister mentality, as the motto was back in the warehouse and still to this day. And so seeing Union Hill grow over the last 25 years, looking towards the future as we come up on the anniversary and celebration, for you, what would be an area that you would love to see continue to grow and kind of nurture something at our church?
Well, because we've grown quite a bit, I'm always, I think the concern is that we have people who come and we just miss the connection between them attending and maybe placing membership and yet becoming, connecting and belonging. And everybody, of course, has some sense of responsibility to that on their own end. But I think, we could do better in helping to assimilate people, engage people, equip people, and then help them to serve. So that's something I wish, when I think about all the needs of Union Hill, I think first and foremost those are within myself, because I think everybody out there is doing an incredible job, and I'm the one who's the church allows to commit more time to this financially than supporting of me. But so I think that I wish I could do a better job of reaching out and connecting and helping people get connected, and that they're on the right track of spiritual maturity.
And it is one of the challenges of like a quickly growing church, of being in a spot where we have people coming in really quickly and new families. And then, okay, how do we plug these people into our family to feel like they belong and feel welcomed, but ultimately either refresh if they're coming from a place of hurt to, hey, here's some stability for a while. But then after that, being able to grow in our faith, but also grow in our service as well. So plugging them in to that is a challenge, because it is hard when we have 400 people, over 400 people on some Sundays, and continue to have people visiting, but then also being mindful of the people that have been here for 25 years as well, of, hey, we want you to still feel connected, and it's not just about the new people coming in. And so it is hard to find that balance of what that looks like. But I think that comes also down to, as you said, equipping people to do that as well.
Yeah, I'm certainly amazed at how many people we have here that do so much. I'm just always, one of the things when I came here and decided to make that transition and help plant Union Hill, I had seen, I think, a number of churches that, to be honest, if they just kind of disappeared, it wouldn't be noticed that much, only because they just don't have much of an impact on their community. And my dream was always to be here and part of a congregation that if we disappeared, it would leave a crater of absence. And we do have now so many people that do so much organized here at Union Hill, or just their own ministries throughout, that it inspires me, and I'm amazed with that. So I'm certainly very thankful for those people who feel that personal sense of service to Christ.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty amazing the amount that you hear of people that are not paid ministers, but yet have this servant heart to go and do things. And then having a church that allows for, if there's an idea and God is pushing for it and we see that growth happen. I mean, the food pantry and the clothing closet and now the garden adding to it and just all these other things that are growing here from just people being passionate about wanting that to happen. And then allowing and equipping people to say, hey, when you're here, we want you to serve. And so I think as a challenge for our members here, don't be just content where we're at already, but hey, what's something that you feel God has placed on your heart, or you've had multiple people talk to you about it? Maybe God has been working on you in some way and we miss it because we get busy and all those other things. And so looking for the future of, hey, what's that growth area, and getting people connected and staying here and ultimately serving God's kingdom. So if Union Hill were to disappear, man, people miss that. And not because of us, but because of the work that God is doing through those people.
And I appreciate the fact that this church allows me to be outward and directed, and from the chaplaincy program that I do to teaching, they really, I see myself much like a missionary here. And so that means that other people just pick up and do things that need to be done. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, it is pretty great to have just the amount of talent that God has blessed us here to allow us to have flexibility to do separate things. And there are people here that are wanting to step in and do those things that allow us to go do other things that other people wouldn't have. Maybe other people at different churches would not have that freedom to be able to do those things.
And it's just exciting to see what God is doing. And I don't know how many baptisms
Oh, wow. Been. It's like one a week for the past couple months almost.
Several months. And I mean, and that's exciting to see all the ministries that are, I mean, I go to something in the community and they're talking about different ministries that are happening here. I mean, this morning, when they were doing the food pantry, they had 14 cars come through.
Wow.
At the opening, the beginning of this. I mean, I don't know how many they ended up with, but lots of people. I got a woman stopped in the other day, and she said, I just moved here, and I was needing some help, and I was at the laundromat, and this guy said, well, you need to go to Union Hill. They're the church that helps people.
Wow.
That's what I'd like to be known for, the church that helps people.
Yeah. And what a good way to show God's love in those areas, to have people just know, even if they don't go here, Union Hill helps people, no matter where you're at or what you're needing. And that just brings in more people to more help. I mean, like, we've done the food pantry forever, but then a couple of weeks ago, we had how many eggs that were just donated from someone that just like they were washing them in here, and we were able to give out double eggs for a while.
People in the community bring stuff here to the building saying, I know you give out food. Here's supplies. Here's other things. Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. So seeing the growth of trying to get people still more connected is always a challenge. But what's been one of your favorite parts of being here since the beginning that you've seen Union Hill? What's your favorite part about Union Hill?
Well, I think that's, to me, amazing that I'm doing, weddings for young men and women that I announced their birth here. And so to have roots and, that's special to me, to have the connections, the deep connections of generations here that, and to see that among each other, to share life together, death together, new beginnings together. And in this little small corner of the world to see church as it happens in a very organic family, way, that's been special to be a part of, and I've been thankful to be, in this story.
Yeah, because that is crazy to have been there for the birth announcement, and then
Yeah.
now to see them grow up to the point where now, man, I had your picture on the Sunday slides, and then now are marrying you and seeing you grow into this new identity and having this moments together is, man, that's pretty crazy to be able to be a part of that.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often. So that's cool. And as you said, even with those generational things that happen as we continue to, as a church, age and mature.
Yeah.
I think one of the elders said, like, we're not a teenage church anymore or a child church. We're an adult church now.
Yeah.
And so that comes with some responsibility, but it also comes with a cool history to be able to look back on and see how the people came before us served, and being able to admire and look at that example to then go and do likewise. And see that fulfilled in other ways as well. Well, Steve, I know you have a lot of things going on, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. But just big thank you for the amount that you do. I mean, it is incredible to have the wisdom, and everyone that I talk to always comes back to just the sound teachings and appreciation for the talents that God has given you, and the wisdom that you have helping guide and direct our church. I know just as a personal mentor for me over the past almost 10 years now, to be able to come ask you questions and always willing to talk, even when you're, I know, busy with other things, to set time aside for the people here as well. So Steve, just thank you so much for everything that you do. And for everyone listening, thank you for taking time, and look forward to the next time together.